2025 has been a strange year for superhero movies. A year that has seen Marvel Studios lean into the nostalgia fueled artless slop angle profitably prioritized by Deadpool and Wolverine by casting everyone and their mother in the upcoming Avengers Doomsday. But it has also seen some of the most artistically interesting superhero movies in years, such as Superman and Thunderbolts. In this way, there is a sense in which this year has been, in itself, a struggle to define what the future of the superhero genre looks like. As the cracks in the Marvel Studios' productions finally begin to leak, and it becomes clear that chasing the formulaic style defined by Joss Whedon and the Russo brothers is no longer enough to deliver box office billions. I feel like the perfect movie to sum this struggle up is Captain America Brave New World, a film whose failures are so mundane that it becomes a perfect example of everything wrong with Marvel's current model, exemplifying the doom spiral of chasing nostalgia and endlessly higher budgets for progressively lessening returns, showing why Marvel felt the need to try and breathe new life into their franchise with this summer's Fantastic Four. For the sake of not wasting time, let's just jump right into the review. Spoilers ahead. Captain America Brave New World is a film that Marvel Studios wants you to think is a tense political thriller, in the same vein as what they aimed for with Captain America the Winter Soldier. As with the Winter Soldier, this runs up against the very obvious barrier that is that Marvel Studios cannot be political. To take a political stance is to be controversial. To be controversial is to possibly deny your film four-quadrant appeal, thus inhibiting profitability, which is what all of these movies are about at the end of the day. Just as the first Avenger took great pains to keep Hydra a step removed from the actual Nazis of the film, presumably so that there weren't any moral quibbles over selling Red Skull action figures, so too must any Marvel's film scrub itself of any obvious political elements. In The Winter Soldier, for example, we are told that Hydra wants to eliminate high-profile targets to take over the world. At no point are we actually told what they plan to do after taking over the world, because that would be politics. So right off the bat, before we even start discussing the actual text of this film, we have to accept that this is a political thriller that will in fact only adopt the aesthetics of politics rather than actually seek to say anything in particular, which is perfectly summed up by one of the final scenes of the film in which Sam Wilson says, "If we can't see the good in each other, then we've already lost."
Look, if we can't see the good in each other, we've already lost the fight.
He says this to a man who not that long ago went on a rampage causing untold destruction. Sam Wilson cannot bring himself to even condemn that. Having mentioned Winter Soldier, now is probably a good time to mention that if you have seen Winter Soldier, you have basically seen this film. Both films feature Captain America uncovering a conspiracy that has infiltrated the highest ranks of government, teaming up with a Falcon and an ex-Black Widow, featuring mind control, involving exploration of a secret military base housing a villain from a previous film who has undergone an immense physical transformation, even down to both films featuring a twist villain played by a 70s Hollywood movie star. Obviously, with films in the same genre, you will always have similarities, but this truly takes the cake. It is literally the same structure. Another thing to recognize about this film is that despite being a Captain America film on the face, it is in fact a legacy sequel to 2008's Incredible Hulk starring Edward Norton. The film opens with a heavy exposition dump for that film because it came out 17 years ago and is not even particularly well liked or remembered. Marvel's pivot in recent years towards this kind of navel-gazing nostalgia bait has been talked about to death. Instead of trying to provide meaningful or effective storytelling, they instead throw in characters from movies 20 years ago as a form of jangling keys. This has worked for them in the beginning, as they jangled the keys of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, beloved iterations of extremely popular characters. But here it becomes clear that the well is all but dry, as they attempt to provide the same treatment to Tim Blake Nelson's Samuel Stearns and Liv Tyler's Betty Ross. One of the closing scenes of this film is a heavily built-up reunion between Betty Ross and her father, that falls flat not only because Betty is not a character in this film up to that point, but also because Thaddeus Ross has been recast from the late William Hurt to Harrison Ford, meaning that the nostalgia you are supposed to be getting metatextually is a scene where two actors who were not in a movie together are now in the same room. So even the most basic of jangly keyed member berries does not work anymore. On the topic of Betty, when I say she is not a character in this film, I am not simply being facetious. She genuinely has no presence in this film beyond being mentioned by President Ross in every scene he's in to remind you that she exists. Maybe Liv Tyler wasn't available for reshoots. We are told that she does not talk to him anymore because of when he tried to kill her boyfriend 17 years ago. Which is fair. But this is how they tie Betty into the main theme of the film, which is the question of whether President Ross has changed. You can put question in big quotations there because the film never actually doubts itself on that front. From beginning to end, we are told not only that Ross wants to change, but that he has changed. Every questionable action he takes in the film can be chalked up to Dr. Stearns' influence over him with the gamma pills that he's been poisoning him with, thereby making this not a question. However, the film still treats it as if it is, emphasizing it as if it is some great philosophical ponderance. One of the first statements we hear from Ross is that he is near the end of his first 100 days as president, the days that will define his presidency. A question of what kind of man or president he is. We repeatedly get conversations of people insisting Ross has or has not changed, not only a nod to the change in actor, but also carrying the double meaning of his inevitable transformation into the Red Hulk. It is not absurd to say that the film is obsessed with this idea, possibly because it is the only idea the film has. Beyond the query of Ross's capacity to grow, the film has no bigger ideas or questions in it beyond dredging up the old ridiculous Civil War arguments about whether powered people should be regulated. And this is largely because of the refusal to engage with any political ideas in this political thriller, leaving yet another MCU film that is nearly as self-obsessed and incestuous as Deadpool and Wolverine. Beyond that, we have what is maybe the most infamous criticism of this movie, the reshoots. Now, to be clear, reshoots are a natural part of the filming process. They happen all of the time, and there is nothing inherently bad about reshoots. However, with that said, this film has been shot and reshot so many times that it's hard to tell how much of the original work is left. Take for example Shira Haas's character of Ruth Bat Saraf, an Israeli ex-Black Widow working for President Ross. This character does nothing of any consequence. She has no impact on the plot, she has no actual character herself. If you removed her from the film, no one would notice the hole. So why is she in it then? Well, that's because the original draft of the film featured her as Israeli superhero Sabra, another Hulk character incidentally, but for natural and obvious reasons, Marvel Studios got a bit antsy about the idea of prominently featuring a superhero embodying a genocidal apartheid colonial state in the 2020s, and so reshot the movie to reduce her role, evidently doing so much that she no longer actually has a place in the film. Another example of these reshoots is the presence of Giancarlo Esposito as Sidewinder, a beloved actor whose scenes in this film appear to be from another movie. There's something very obviously off about his scenes that might lead even a casual viewer to wonder if he was simply inserted after the fact, which was the case. He was not a part of the original script and was later shoehorned into the movie through reshoots. Yet another example is the clearly mirrored roles of Isaiah Bradley and Samuel Stearns, both characters experimented on and imprisoned unjustly by the US government for years, an idea that I am certain in one version of this movie was intentional, but in the released version is simply a card left on the table, a thread left dangling, storytelling potential squandered. Finally, I feel the need to mention how ugly this film is to watch. The green screening in some scenes is genuinely horrendous, leaving some important moments of the film hard to pay attention to because of how painful it is to look at. This shot of Samuel Stearns talking to Captain America haunts me. It genuinely looks like a YTP. I promise you this is actually in the movie. I have not edited this. Even the final fight with Red Hulk among the cherry blossoms feels like they just went, cherry blossoms are pretty, if we set the scene there it'll look good, and thought no further about it. There is no intentionality to the look or design of this film at all, leaving it as an uglier, less interesting imposter version of the already narratively weak Winter Soldier. In summary, Captain America 4 is a film that fails on nearly every level. It looks bad, the writing is about as blunt and simplistic as a sledgehammer to the knee, and even the artless attempt at nostalgia bait completely fails, because it requires your audience to have nostalgia for a film most of them haven't seen. As well as that, the film fails to cohere with itself at all, with the numerous reshoots chipping away at any semblance of intentionality until you end up with this film that has no character, one repetitive and poorly executed theme, and just barely manages to even scrape together a plot out of the wreckage. No wonder all of the marketing for the film focused on the fact that it contained Red Hulk. It turns out there was nothing else to market. All of this leaves us with a film that is so mundanely terrible that it completely accidentally becomes this fascinating case study for the current state of the dying Marvel Cinematic Universe, endlessly seeking the instant gratification of the nostalgia-fueled box office, with no thought given to the long-term impact of that kind of filmmaking. As Jay Springett so aptly put it, it's cultural fracking. And I think that's a good place to leave it for this video. As always, I'd like to thank you so much for watching, and if you like this and would like to see more, the like and subscribe buttons are your best way to signal that. The next Doctor Who video is on the way, but it's looking like a long one, so I thought I'd do an easy, smaller project like this to make the gap between videos a little less big. Thank you all again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.